Good morning, Steve Weber. Welcome to the American Gumption Morning Show on January 11th, Monday, the second full week of the new year. And last week was a wild news week, and I would just like to turn the page and start a new fresh week and not talk about the craziness that's going on in the world. Let's talk about the love and the joy and the good things that are happening, because some of those things are happening, and lots of those things are happening. So anyway, welcome to the new week. Steve Weber here, broadcasting on the American Gumption Facebook and YouTube channels with my broadcast partner, Spirituality Gone Wild. So happy to be part of that network. I'll be talking more about Spirituality Gone Wild and the things that are going on, and the team and the member site and all the good things that are happening and are going to happen in this coming year. So it's a fun time to be part of a new venture. It's actually Spirituality Going Wild is not a new venture. It's 3 years old. And I was lucky enough to join them right on the week of their third birthday, which was last summer or in August. And so anyway, they're really 3.5 years old at this point. But this is going to be a breakout year for them. And I'm happy to be part of that team and organization, and one of the co-creators of many. So anyway, so we broadcast here typically 5 days a week. Actually, 4 days a week is what we're aiming for 2021. So I'm going to, intersperse a day here or there, or maybe a couple days some weeks as things progress and evolve. But anyway, the goal throughout the course of the year will be to do 4 to 5 broadcasts each week, live broadcast, and but over the course of the year, it'll average out to probably about four broadcasts a week, 200 shows. That's the goal, 200 shows in 2021. So this is show number 105. So it just turns out that it's the 5th show of this year. And I was able to do exactly 100 shows last year. So I'm very happy about that and pleased to be off to a great start. All righty. So now today, I'm going to just do a abbreviated show. I don't have a guest scheduled, so I'm just going to do a monologue. And the title of the monologue is "Are You an Impersonator?" And it was my weekly blog post that I wrote yesterday. And so I'll get into that in just a minute. But first, let me tell you what's coming up this week. So we have guests scheduled for Tuesday and Wednesday, tomorrow and Wednesday. And Amy Van Linge is going to be our guest tomorrow. Amy is a life coach, a speaker, a conscious parenting advocate, and a spiritual adventurer. She's got a great story. In some ways, our young lives started out similar, but at that point, how she evolved on her path, and she's a generation younger than me. She's just a great young lady. I met her, I met her a couple months ago, and then we talked several before Christmas, and we kind of got to know a little bit about each other and what we'll be talking about tomorrow. And so anyway, it's just going to be fun. She's got a fascinating life story, and she's making a difference in this world. So Amy is going to join us tomorrow. And then on Wednesday, Tamra Oviatt is going to join us. And Tamra is a speaker, author, and healer. Now, her brand of healing is what she calls sacred activations. And imagine a computer program and the operating system, right? If it's Microsoft, if it's it could be a Microsoft computer, runs on that operating system, or an Apple computer running on the OS. Well, that your operating system is kind of like the thing that keeps everything going and running. And sacred activations is essentially an download of your human operating system. And so she has been a spiritual teacher and healer for about 30 years, but 8 years ago, I believe it was 2012, maybe 2013, she kind of went through this crazy, her own words, crazy thing that happened where she ended up like downloading what ultimately has become the sacred activation. So we'll talk about that on Wednesday. If you believe that there is source energy and you connect with it, then the next 2 days are going to be a conversation about people who have connected to their source energy and are making a difference as a result of that. Alrighty, so now let me go ahead and launch right into my monologue, and I'll say hello to Bettina and Susan, who are checking in. Thank you for being here, ladies. We appreciate you joining us today and many days of the week. We appreciate that very much. So good morning to you. Now, are you an impersonator? So the way this came about was last Thursday, I ended up doing an in-studio interview with Austin Haynes. Austin's been a guest here on the show, and he invited me to come over to his broadcast studio where they have a Flashpoint TV. Flashpoint is his brand. And so we did it. We recorded an interview, and that's going to air this Friday. And I'll be sharing that here and talking about that more. But one little segment of the conversation, we touched on, it wasn't the overall conversation. So I don't feel like I'm revealing, what that interview is going to be all about. But the idea of being an impersonator, and I want to reflect on that today. So I just want to, I don't think this is going to take too long, maybe 15 plus minutes or so. And that'll be today's show. But the idea being that in our early years of working, as a young adult, maybe even as a teenager, late teenager, our first jobs, we essentially, when we start jobs, when we start a new career, our business, our first job, we're essentially, we're pretending, we're impersonating whoever, whatever we're supposed to be. And my first job when I was 11 years old, I was a paper boy. And, so the first couple of days I'm out there, I'm pretending I'm a paper boy and I'm impersonating a paper boy. And then, after a while, you wear that label because you feel like you know what you're doing. So it's not just, it's not just a, something that you're pretending to do. You actually become that person. And so the whole idea of faking it until you make it, you've heard that phrase, fake it until you make it. We are pretending, we're impersonating, we're willing ourselves to become whatever it is we need to become or choose to become. So in my particular years, and I looked at this, and I'm going to tie this all together with the impersonator and the Forrest Gump thing and the identity thing afterwards. But indulge me as I start out with the idea that these first jobs of my career, like I jumped into them and I was like committed and, having fun with them. And then all of a sudden one day you kind of go, this isn't who I am. And you move on to something else. But here's a list of basically 5 jobs that I had pre Forrest Gump days. So my first job was I worked in a metal fabrication shop, and it was the Coppersmith Union. So I called myself a coppersmith. I did a little bit of copper work, but very little. Coppersmithing had kind of gone by the way of the buggy whip manufacturers, right? There just wasn't being, in the olden days, copper was used to make brew kettles. Well, they started making them out of stainless steel, and copper just went away in terms of being used as a, something where men typically would bang on copper and make things out of it, big tanks and then throw heat onto it and use it for cooking and processing different things. So, but anyway, I was a welder, I was a fitter, I was a fabricator, and I started out as a helper. So those were all terms that I called myself. I was this guy who knew how to make stuff out of metal. Welder's probably the easiest one that most people can think about. And so, but the guy who, doesn't do the welding, but forms and shapes it and cuts it and rolls it and, assembles it, that would be more of a fitter or a fabricator. So I was all of those terms. Then I ended up in California, and my job there for the first 6 years when I was in California, I ended up, long story short, I was a facilities manager. I took care of, equipment and stuff like that. So my skills that I had learned as a fabricator and welder and fitter, I wasn't doing any of that exact work any longer, but I had learned enough skills that I was able to, take care of the building and, the electricity and the plumbing and the equipment that this particular organization that I worked for needed to have taken care of and maintained and assembled and put together. And then they moved to a new building, and I was involved in the move and the setting up of the new building. So anyway, I was the facilities manager, we'll just call it that. And then I ended up with 2 jobs that were 2 years each. Basically that was it. So it was like a 4-year period where I was a sales guy, and so I was selling stuff. Now, here, what was interesting about the sales job is that, like, one day you're like not a salesperson. I was a facilities manager, and then boom, the next day I'm like I get hired by a company and then another company, and boom, I'm a sales guy, and I'm out there and I'm representing their product until you do a crash course and you learn about their product, and now you're talking about it as if you're a expert, an advocate, promoting the things that people need, and I'm acting as an intermediary, and I'm representing the company that has the product. But it was funny because it was like one day you kind of scratch your head going, all of a sudden I'm a sales guy, and I'm like representing whatever it is that these guys are selling, and I'm an advocate for it. And I didn't, know anything about it other than, but you learn and you progress through it. So you go from that, that faking it till you make it kind of thing. And then you're doing that. So then now we're up to about 1990, and I decided I wanted to work more independently. So not necessarily working for a company, but, representing myself. So I ended up joining a very small organization, a couple guys, really one guy, and there was a couple other guys that were part of it. But basically one guy had this business, and he was a custom clothier. He sold men's clothing, custom, like shirts and, suits and pants, slacks, and so it was already 1990. It was kind of, casual Fridays hadn't quite come into play yet, but the whole idea of like wearing suits and stuff was already on the downside. So I kind of joined it at a weird time, but there were still people who were wearing it. And so the idea was that now you're going to sell this. And so I suddenly am a custom clothier or a tailor, right? Well, a tailor makes clothes and cuts it and does that. I didn't do any of that stuff. All I was doing was measuring the person, figuring out what they wanted, showing fabrics and selling that way. So that lasted for about 5 years. And then there was like about a year or two after that ended up, fading away. And I ended up being a manufacturer's rep and office furniture and some kind of an industrial tool gizmo widget that I sold. And so I was doing that. And then of course the Forrest Gump thing came along, 1996, and boom, then that changed everything. So now I've officially become an impersonator. And same thing happened like day one. I'm out there like pretending I'm Forrest Gump, and I didn't feel like I was Forrest Gump. I had done it once before, one day before for Halloween. And that was a year and a half earlier. And now suddenly I'm hired. And then the next day my picture's on the newspaper, and that just happened. That just like, boom, took off. And of course the restaurant was operated and managed by people who are very competent in the restaurant management business and understood it. And they had thought about this plan, and I kind of showed up at the last minute, and they hired me, and they saw how the crowd responded to what I was doing. And it was like a wonderful thing. And so I became, an impersonator. And it wasn't quite as simple as that. I mean, it was like the beginning was kind of like, it's like people were like, well, who are you? And I'm like, well, my name's Steve. And very quickly, the people from Bubba Gump, they realized that I just got to be in character. I can't be telling people my name and Steve. I got to be Forrest Gump. And I remember the manager of the restaurant, Dave, telling me, "Hey, you are Forrest Gump. Don't tell anybody. Steve doesn't exist. When you're wearing the costume and sitting out there." So, there was like, the ego part of me like wanted to like, oh, who's Steve, blah, blah, blah. But then, the common sense part of me said, no, I better just do what they say because they're paying me. And, and this is a lot of fun. And it was a lot of fun. And so anyway, I sat on the bench and talked to people, and it was all great. So, but I became this impersonator. So over that first year, I got really good at just entertaining people, and I loved it. And it was a wonderful thing. And, there was like the first couple of months, I'd walk out there and I felt like I was Steve, and yet people responded to me like I was Forrest. And so little by little, I kind of convinced myself more and more that, hey, this really works. This is really a cool thing. People think that, I'm Forrest Gump. They think they're meeting the real Forrest Gump. And so, I just kept rolling with that and learning to, play that role harder and harder. And then over the first 5 years, I got really good at it, where I kind of made it a science, and I embraced the fact that I couldn't tell people, and people would be, who are you? What are you? And I wouldn't break character, and they finally would go, okay, I got it. They'd be like a little annoyed. They go, oh, okay, I got it. You not allowed to break character. All right, well, never mind. Don't bother telling me. And they'd walk off, and, it's like, well, sorry, I can't, it's just not, it's just not the thing you can do. You can't tell people. You can't be the character and then do it. It's like acting. It was acting is what it was. And I never really took any acting lessons, although I did take how to be a good salesman training courses when I was that sales guy. And that was acting, right? That was acting. That was like, hey, look at this product here. This is the greatest thing in the world. Well, do what I want it to do. Sure, it'll do what you want it to do. And so you're going through this whole process. And of course you're learning the whole time, and, you don't want to say, you don't want to just be like completely BSing and making stuff up. And I saw people who went that way and used that technique to, make sales, but I never felt very good about that particular thing. I wanted to, I wanted it to be the truth. And, you kind of learn how to, split the difference between the truth and giving the person what they need and want. So anyway, so I'm doing this, but the idea of being an impersonator and imposter syndrome that many people feel, that was always kind of in the back of my mind. It's like, am I really this person? Am I really doing this? And when I was selling stuff, am I really like, and even when I was, like probably when I was a paper boy, it's like, am I really a paper boy? So, imposter syndrome, rest in your, the deep, in the shadows, in the deep crevices, not something you're like out there talking about and, reflecting on, but something that's there, again, in the shadows, in that background, kind of the self-doubt that we have about, who we are and, are we being genuine and authentic? So now let's fast forward to the spring and the summer of 2011. My gig with Bubba Gump came to an end in President's Weekend of 2011. That was my last time I worked with them. All right. So now it's, so then I'm there. And I had already decided that I was going to be a speaker. I was going to, and I was already, I already had some speaking gigs. And so I was trying to figure out how to build that business and make that work. And I'm now living in Montana full time. And I remember I went to a 4th of July party, and I just, I just went as Steve. But people, ask you what you do. And I end up, meeting the host of it, and he knew me somehow. We knew each other, and he knew about the Forrest Gump thing, because people in people there, I don't want to say people in Montana, because it has nothing to do with Montana. It had to do with just the fact that I was there. So that's where they were. They were fascinated by the whole Gump story, and I loved telling it. And so it was my own doing, in that I would tell the story of how I had been Forrest Gump. So people were fascinated. They wanted to see it. They wanted to experience it. And yet I was not feeling like I was that character any longer. I was trying to figure out, I was at the beginning stages of really like realizing that, well, who the heck's Steve? You know, what's next? Well, how do I make this all work? And so I'm at this party, and the host loved the idea that I was the host of this 4th of July party, loved the idea that I was Forrest Gump. And everybody who came in, he's like, hey, everybody, this is Forrest Gump. And he's like making a big deal out of it. And people would like walk up to the party and go, hey, this is Forrest Gump. And like, I'm just standing there like a bump on the log. And they look at me and like, you know, I didn't have the white suit on or shirt and suitcase and box of chocolates. I'm just standing there, you know, hanging out. And like, they're like, oh, okay, nice to meet you, Forrest Gump. And it was very weird. It turned out it was like kind of a creepy feeling, the whole thing, like, because I didn't feel any longer like I was Forrest Gump, and yet I didn't know who Steve was, and I didn't know how Steve was supposed to behave, or, you know, I was trying to figure that all out. So anyway, that was kind of like a very much a turning point moment where I was like, oh man, we gotta come up with a better plan for this thing. So there was a period where, you know, it's kind of like, I called it the post-Gump blues, where, you know, it was like, I didn't want to hang out and be the character any longer. And I wasn't feeling like I was the character. And yet I didn't know who I was. And, and I forgot to tell an important part. So back when people were asking me on the bench, are you really Forrest Gump? Are you really, you know, what's your real name? I want to know what's your real name. I go, come on, you can tell me. What's your real name? That's okay. Just tell me. You know, it was fast. People wanted to know. The other thing that people would say to me, not necessarily on the bench, but like when I was not being being Forrest, but I was being Steve, people would say, do you ever get confused about who Steve is and who Forrest is? Does it ever blur together? And I heard that question so many times, or I had heard it often enough that I came up with a very strong answer. And the answer was no. I have no confusion about it. I have perfect clarity about who Steve is and who Forrest is. And I don't know why I was defensive about it, but I was. And I convinced myself that like there was like a role to play, and then there was like Steve, and so I really had my time when I was working being Forrest Gump, which I loved. And then there was the time when I was Steve doing, whatever I was doing during the rest of the week. And I actually loved being Forrest Gump more than I loved being Steve, I think, a lot of that time. So anyway, it became, as I looked back on it, when people asked me, is there any confusion about it? And I would defensively say, no, there's no confusion. If I was actually being honest, I would have said, man, I am completely confused and I have no idea who I am. I have no idea who I am. And that's how I felt, in that, after that 4th of July party, and, the next, 2012 was kind of a, that was probably the low point of that whole transition period, where it's like, who the heck am I? What am I going to do? I had this great thing going, had this great ride, and then what do I go? The Bruce Springsteen song, Glory Days, people sitting around in the bar talking about the glory days, I had like a fear that was going to be me. And it was me to a certain degree, it was. So anyway, so as I kind of going to the next step with this thing, Forrest was like this really nice, warm security blanket that I didn't want to let go of. I mean, people loved Forrest, and I loved Forrest, and it was fun, and it gave me something to talk about, and it gave other people something to talk about. So I had this like I said, this security blanket that I didn't want to let go of, and yet I knew that I couldn't keep wrapping myself in it, because it wasn't working, and I had to move on. And the problem, or the challenge, is that I didn't know exactly, what I was supposed to, how I was supposed to go and, be next. And so I ended up really asking the question, well, who am I? What do I believe? And that, once I went down that path, it was like it was like opening a big giant can of worms. It was like, not like once you opened it, you had no choice but to deal with it. But once it got opened, it was also like, wow, this is not going to be as simple as just, as simple as just oh, this is it, okay, now that that's done, let's move on to the next thing. So it ended up taking, it took time, it took years, and I wrote a lot during that time. And the good thing is I learned how to write. And one of my favorite phrases from that time was, and I forget if it's William James, or I apologize for not remembering, but it's like, I never know what I think about something until I read what I wrote about it. I never know what I think about something until I read what I wrote about it. And that was me at the time. I was doing a lot of writing to try to figure out what it is I really think about things and what I believe. And when I would write, and it still happens to this very day, when I write something and I go, oh yeah, that's good, I like that. That's what I believe. And that's what I did yesterday with my weekly update, Gump Date. Go to AmericanGumption.com and subscribe. Get that. It goes out weekly. I write a weekly article, and this is the article. I'm doing a video verbal explanation of the article with a few more details in it, but that was basically what my article was about yesterday. It's like, are you an impersonator? And that journey of going through it, feeling like this pretender at the beginning of my, certainly my impersonating days. But even when I looked back to my early jobs, like, was I just impersonating like a paper boy? Was I just impersonating a coppersmith? Was I just impersonating a salesman? Because all those things like were important while I was doing them, and they were great. And then all of a sudden one day I'm like, you know what? I'm not doing this anymore. I'm going to go do something else. And then boom. And again, you just like instantly went from being like, the day you got hired as a salesman, you're like, oh, I'm a salesman. And that's who you're saying you are. And yet in your mind, it's like, am I really that person? And I would imagine parents go through the same thing. I've not been a parent, so I don't know that for sure. But I imagine you bring the kid home and you're like, oh, I'm a parent. And you figure it out. You learn how to be that person. It's not just something you like know how to do. You have to learn it. So that's the journey of life, is like all these experiences that we have and how we get there. All right. So now we go fast forward to about a year ago, a little longer, 2 years to 18 months ago, where I was like, I got to get out of here, Montana. It's like, it's time to go. I'm done with this place. And I realized at that point that all the reasons that I moved to Montana, when I moved there, like starting in 2003, but not really until 2007, 8, that I actually got there. All of the reasons that I thought I was going to Montana turned out to not be the reasons that I went there. And a new set of reasons came up on why I had actually moved there and lived there for, over 10 years, over a decade. And basically the reason, here's the reason for going to Montana is it was an opportunity to stop and start over again, because I had gotten myself to a point where I was so confused, or just not sure where I was going. And maybe this happens to everybody. But in my particular case, it was like I had this like one identity and this character that I had, really attached myself to and had a heck of a lot of fun and made a lot of people happy. And it was a wonderful, wonderful experience. And yet, what do you do after that? How do you follow up, and what do you, and there's something there, and you want to carry some of it forward, but you don't want to, like live in that glory days kind of mode where you're just like living in the past. And so that's ultimately Montana gave me a chance to stop and start over again that way. And it gave me a lot of time to reflect and decide, and I did that. I thought, well, why do I believe what I believe? And do I really believe those things? And I ended up, sorting out those ideas. I made a pile I looked at, all my beliefs, and I made them into piles, like beliefs to keep and beliefs to get rid of. And then once you get rid of the beliefs, you have the pile that you still believe, and then you kind of build on that and you expand it and you do some more. So all that, Montana gave me a chance to do all of that sort of thing. And then ultimately it was like, I kind of looked at it as like a chance for healing and forgiving and self-forgiveness, because you blame yourself, you have regrets, and, you live your life saying, you stupid dummy, why did you do that? You shouldn't have done that. And then you ultimately go, oh, well, those were all learning lessons. Those were good things. Those weren't bad things. All these experiences, are neither good nor bad. They're just experiences, and we get to decide and interpret, how do we want to look at them? Do we want to, view them as fun and positive, or do we look at them as things that are good and bad, right and wrong, shame, shouldn't have, couldn't have, should have done this, that kind of thing. And so ultimately what Montana gave me a chance to do was to, clean up a lot of debris. So then once I felt like I was at a place where, okay, the work that I needed to do in Montana was over, and it was like, well, what do I do next? And then it was like, I got to get out of here. I got to go back out into the world. And that's when American Gumption was born. And that's when this, I ended up getting rid of the things and moving, and I'm staying temporarily with family. And the goal was to drive across or live and work from the road. That'll happen sometime in this year, 2021. We'll get out there and make it happen. And, and I'm part of the Spirituality Gone Wild family. And there were many times that I thought, oh, this is it. This is what I'm here to do. And maybe this isn't it, but this really feels like it. And this feels a lot more like my own personal destiny. And so I'm grateful for that. And I'm happy to be here, and I'm happy to come to you, 5 days a week and get to do these monologues. Today's a little bit longer monologue. That's cool. And we interview people, and we have guests, and we have regular segments, and we'll have more regular segments coming up. And then once I get out onto the road, the show will continue in some kind of a, new, slightly altered or maybe radically offered way. It'll just keep going though. And it's just going to, keep on happening. So that's it. I ultimately, we want our inner self to match our body self, right? And so I was gifted this body that, looked like Forrest Gump, and I was able to, for 15 years do that. And then, but then what do you do next with it? And what is the inner side telling me to do? And it's really, that's what I feel like I'm doing now with the American Gumption Project and the American Gumption Morning Show and the American Gumption We the People video show that will be forthcoming, and all of the other American Gumption spinoff opportunities that will come and be part of my journey the next couple of years. So anyway, that's it, everybody. Have a good day. Thank you for listening to this little rant on Are You an Impersonator? I certainly have been, and really, I don't want to be that impersonator. I want to live as authentically and genuine. Oh, one last thing. I have a quote here. In 2012, I was at a conference, the Sun Valley Wellness Festival 2012. And I was at a Alan Cohen, who's become a great friend and influencer to me. He had a seminar, and I was there in a seminar, and I raised my hand and I said, Alan, how can you be genuine and authentic when you're pretending to be somebody else? And, anyway, it was, how do you be genuine and authentic when you're pretending to be somebody else? And anyway, it was, I get that impersonating is a profession, just like acting is a profession. And it was great. And I was good at it. And I had a wonderful time. But where do you go? And it really, that question wasn't about being the impersonator, because I was being genuine and authentic as I impersonated Forrest Gump all those years. But now that, that was over, it was like, how do you become genuine and authentic? And maybe carry the character forward with you, but not necessarily wrap yourself in that blanket of the character that I had done for all those years. So, alrighty, that's it. Tomorrow, Amy Van Lynch, life coach, speaker, conscious parenting advocate, spiritual adventurer, and we'll talk about conscious living. Amy and I will have a nice conversation tomorrow about that. And Tamra Oviatt on Wednesday. And Tamra's is also a speaker and author of 9 books in the last 8 years. So she's been cranking it out and her healing modality is sacred activations, and think of them as like a download of your operating system. And so she has figured out how to connect with source and how to share that connection with other people. And she's been doing remarkable work. So that's going to be on Wednesday's conversation. All righty, everybody. Well, have a great rest of your day. I appreciate your all being here today. I will see you tomorrow for the conversation with Amy Van Linge and Brandon Schaefer. Since it's Tuesday, he will join us too. All right. Have a great day.